While the world remembers India's freedom struggle as the tale of a frail man in homespun cotton facing down an empire with silence and salt somewhere else. In the shadows of the same story, another Indian was secretly studying maps, military manuals, and world wars, preparing not to break the law, but to break the British Empire itself. That man is a boy right now. The year is 1897. Cuttack, a small town in the Orissa division of British India. It is a world of breeches and bayonets, of British judges in starched collars and barefoot Indian clerks shuffling files in dim offices. Inside a tall, solid house with red-tiled roof, a child is born into comfort and respectability, everything the empire wants its good Indians to aspire to. They name him Subhas. His father, Janakinath Bose, is a wealthy lawyer, sharp, successful, respected even by the British. His mother, Prabhavati, is deeply religious, gentle but unbending when it comes to discipline. In this house, English newspapers lie beside devotional books. The Bible and the Bhagavad Gita can share the same table. It's a well-mannered, upwardly mobile Indian family, exactly the type the Raj believes it has molded in its own image. Only inside the quiet-eyed boy wandering its corridors, something is already wrong with the script. Picture him at 6 or 7, standing on the veranda, watching a British officer ride past. The horse's hooves strike the road with perfect rhythm. The officer doesn't glance at the Indian houses. Why would he? This land, these people exist for the crown. A few boys on the street scamper to the side, their eyes lowered. One stumbles into the mud. The officer doesn't even slow down. Subhas just watches. No tantrum, no dramatic protest. Just an intense, burning stare that lingers a little too long, as if even then he is filing the picture away. As if some part of him has already whispered a dangerous sentence. One day, this will end. Fast forward a few years, Calcutta. The air is thicker, dirtier, more electric. Tram bells, hawkers' cries, English accents slicing through Bengali conversations. The young Subhas has been sent here to study because that is what brilliant Indian boys are supposed to do. Get educated, get degrees, and get closer to the empire. He does something worse. He reads Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, whose words turn the motherland into a living goddess. He reads Swami Vivekananda, whose fiery speeches insist that strength is religion. He devours tales of Italian revolutionaries, Irish nationalists, Japanese victories over Russia. Outside, the British flag flies, calm and unquestioned. Inside the mind of this quiet, bespectacled student, flags are already falling. And yet, from the outside, he looks like the perfect imperial product. He's admitted first to Ravenshaw Collegiate School, then to the prestigious Presidency College in Calcutta. His English is flawless, his manners are refined, his grades are outstanding. Teachers nod approvingly when they see his name on exam lists. This one they think will go far. They're right. They just have no idea in which direction. The first open crack comes almost casually. In Presidency College, a British professor, E. F. Oaten, makes a sneering remark about Indian students, about their character, their race. He does it in that offhand way colonizers do when they believe their power is permanent, their insults unanswerable. For a heartbeat, the classroom freezes. Most boys lower their eyes. Subhas does not. The anger that has been quietly collecting inside him, anger from 1,000 little humiliations he has witnessed but never spoken of, suddenly finds a target. Days later, Oaten is attacked on the college grounds by a group of students. No one officially proves who led it. But one name is whispered in corridors, repeated in hostel rooms, eyed suspiciously by the authorities. Subhas Chandra Bose. The British reaction is swift and predictable. Bose is rusticated from Presidency College, punished without trial. It is a warning. This is what happens when you step out of line. To the young man sent home in disgrace, it becomes something else. Proof. Proof that when you challenge the empire, it hits back. Proof that the fight will never be theoretical, never just about speeches and pamphlets. It will be personal. It will hurt. And it will always, always be unfair. He could apologize, beg, adjust. Many do. Instead, he studies harder. Family pressure mounts. Janakinath Bose, loyal to the crown in his own way, sees a future for his son. The Indian Civil Service, that glittering prize reserved for the brightest native minds. An ICS officer is no mere clerk. He is almost a ruler under the British, wielding power, drawing a fat salary, riding in style. For most Indian families, this is the dream. Janakinath doesn't just suggest it, he insists. This is where the first great twist of Subhas's life begins to coil. Because on paper, ICS and patriotism aren't enemies. From inside the system, people say, you can help your country. And Subhas, respectful, affectionate, still deeply attached to his parents, agrees. Outwardly, inwardly, he is bargaining with himself. He tells himself he'll go to England, sit for the exam, prove that Indians are equal, maybe better. That in itself will be a blow to imperial arrogance. It's a plan that keeps both his father and his conscience temporarily satisfied. So, in 1919, as the world staggers out of the First World War and India reels from the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Subhas sails for England. Imagine the scene. The ship cuts through dark waters. On deck, under gray skies, a slim young man in a heavy coat stares toward a horizon that leads not just to London, but into a moral trap. He has a suitcase full of books and an invisible load of expectation. From his family, from his own sense of destiny, from a nation that doesn't yet know his name. He lands, studies at Fitzwilliam Hall, Cambridge. He is disciplined, almost ascetic. While the British elite prance through balls and dinners, he spends nights in cramped rooms grappling with law, history, administration. His fellow students see only another Indian trying to climb the imperial ladder. No one sees the other ladder he is eyeing, the one that leads down into rebellion. He sits for the ICS examination. He ranks fourth, not among Indians, among everyone. The empire nods in satisfaction. Here is a model colonial subject. The son of an Indian lawyer, educated in its institutions, now ready to serve in its most prestigious service. It is as if history itself is conspiring to steer him into safe, respectable collaboration. And then, with the exam cleared, the training open before him, the security of a lifetime's privilege within reach, Subhas does something that shocks almost everyone who hears of it. He walks away, not after a few comfortable years in office, not after climbing the hierarchy. He refuses to even join. In a letter that his father reads with disbelief, Subhas calmly announces that he is renouncing the ICS, that he cannot, in good conscience, serve a government he believes to be immoral. The very idea of swearing loyalty to the British Crown is unbearable. The blow to Janakinath is emotional, financial, social. He has daughters to marry off, sons to support. The ICS would have changed the family's destiny, and his brilliant child is burning that bridge before even stepping onto it. But for Subhas, the real confrontation is not with his father. It is with the clock. Because by 1921, when he returns to India for good, something has changed in the air. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, another barrister who turned his back on imperial comfort, has transformed Indian politics. Non-cooperation, boycotts, Kati, the spinning wheel. He preaches ahimsa, nonviolence, civil disobedience. His frail figure in white simplicity has become the new symbol of defiance. And suddenly, in the theater of India's struggle, there are two very different scripts for revolution, one already being written every day on village roads and in crowded bazaars, with marches and fasts and quiet suffering. The other, still a faint outline in the mind of a young man who believes that empires built by the sword may have to be challenged by the shadow of the sword. From the moment Bose returns, a rivalry begins to form, not of hatred, but of vision. He admires Gandhi's courage, his purity, his towering moral authority. But somewhere deep inside, a stubborn thought refuses to die. If we fight a ruthless empire with nothing but bare hands and good intentions, will we win in time? Time, always time. The British Empire is not just powerful, it is patient. It can wait out petitions, speeches, even decades of slow protest. But Bengal famine, increasing economic exploitation, a generation growing up in chains, none of these can wait forever. Subhas feels it like a physical pressure in his chest. If independence doesn't come soon, it may come too late for millions. So when he first meets Gandhi in 1921, there is both reverence and quiet friction in the air. Picture the scene. Gandhi, wrapped in white homespun, sits cross-legged, calm as a mountain. His voice is soft, his words measured. Around him, other leaders of the Indian National Congress watch. Into this circle walks Subhas, sharply dressed, intense, his dark eyes blazing with questions he is too disciplined to blurt out. He bows. Gandhi smiles. They talk. On the surface, it is cordial, respectful. You have great promise, Gandhi might say. India needs her youth. Subhas expresses his loyalty to the cause, his willingness to suffer for freedom, but beneath the politeness, two different clocks are ticking. For Gandhi, struggle is a long moral pilgrimage. For Bose, it is a race against disaster. Shortly after, he throws himself into the movement. He becomes close to Chittaranjan Das Deshbandhu, the friend of the nation, another leader who believes in more aggressive tactics than Gandhi's. In Bengal, under Das's guidance, Subhas finds what he's been searching for, a political home that feels like a training ground, not just a debating club. He organizes strikes, boycotts, public meetings. His speeches, delivered in resonant English and passionate Bengali, stir crowds into something that looks dangerously like mass awakening. The British notice. They always do. To them, Bose is more alarming than an old saint preaching nonviolence. He is young, charismatic, efficient, educated in their own universities, and absolutely unafraid of prison. If men like him multiply, the empire's carefully maintained illusion of Indian contentment will crack. So, in 1924, they decide to remove him from the chessboard. No formal charges, just accusations of terrorist links and revolutionary sympathies. Sections of draconian laws are invoked. Files move behind closed doors. A faceless machinery grinds, and one morning, police arrive for him. Imagine the door opening before dawn. Boots in the courtyard. A knock that is not really a knock, but a verdict. Subhas steps out, already dressed as if he's been waiting. His mother's eyes are wet but proud. His father's jaw is tight, torn between fear and a grudging recognition that this confrontation, is the natural end of the choice. His son made when he walked away from the ICS. Subhas is arrested and deported, not to a local jail, to Mandalay in Burma. Mandalay is not a cell. It is a slow, calculated attack on the body. The climate is harsh. Disease is rampant. Political prisoners are kept far from home, their families unable to visit, their very names gradually fading from public lips. He is 27, and already exiled within the empire he's vowed to break. Days in Mandalay blur into each other. The heat presses down like a physical weight. His health begins to crumble. Tuberculosis claws at his lungs. The prison doctors are indifferent. An occasional letter arrives from home, edges already yellowed by the time they reach his hands. In the silence of his cell, with fever burning and the future dissolving, the grand ideas of youth are put to a brutal test. Do you still want to fight for freedom when freedom starts with being able to breathe? It's here in this crucible of isolation and illness that a different kind of Subhas Chandra Bose is forged. The romantic young nationalist melts away. In his place, piece by piece, emerges a man who understands that this is not an argument with the British. It is war, whether India chooses to call it that or not. He reads obsessively whatever he can get. History of revolutions, biographies of Garibaldi and Mazzini, accounts of Japan's rise as an Asian power. He studies the Great War, noting which empires fell and why, and one thought keeps returning, half-formed, dangerous, persistent. If the British Empire can be weakened from the outside by a global conflict, then India's struggle cannot afford to move at the pace of spinning wheels and speeches. When history's doors swing open, they do not stay open forever. The clock again. Tick-tock. He doesn't know it yet, but the idea that will one day drive him to seek allies in enemy capitals, to raise an army in foreign lands, is already being born inside a sick, sweating prisoner in Mandalay. Outside, the political landscape of India shifts. New resolutions are passed. Old factions argue. Gandhi calls off movements, launches new ones, wrestles with his own compromises. Other leaders, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, are slowly taking shape as national figures. Inside the Congress, something else is quietly coming into focus. The need for younger, more radical leadership. People who will pick up the torch when the older generation tires. In 1927, after roughly 3 years in Mandalay, the British finally relent. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. Subhas is very ill. Keeping him imprisoned carries the risk of turning him into a martyr if he dies. Releasing him broken and weak seems a safer gamble. A man who can barely stand is not a threat to the empire. They underestimate the thing they cannot see on an X-ray plate, will. When he steps off the train back in Calcutta, his body is frail, but the crowd waiting for him is not. Thousands have gathered, students, workers, clerks, ordinary citizens who still remember the young leader taken away in handcuffs. Now they see him return in a simple shawl, thinner, paler, but with the same unwavering eyes. He raises a hand to acknowledge them. In that moment, the doubt that must have stalked his sickbed dissolves. The fight is not over. It is only just beginning. And in the widening gap between Gandhi's cautious strategies and the impatience of a generation that cannot bear endless delay, Subhas sees his path. It will lead him into the heart of the Indian National Congress. It will push him into open confrontation with the most revered man in the country. It will force him to choose again and again between moral comfort and brutal effectiveness. And somewhere already approaching on the horizon is another storm he can almost feel but not yet name, a second world war that will tear the map of global power apart and give him a narrow, terrifying window of opportunity, a window that will not stay open for long. The window he has been waiting for does not open on a battlefield. It opens in a smoky committee room under ceiling fans that turn too slowly over piles of government files and city complaints. Because before Subhas Chandra Bose can challenge an empire, he has to wrestle with drains, streetlights, and corrupt contractors. This is how his rise to power begins, not with a gunshot, but with garbage. Back from Mandalay, still coughing, he throws himself into public work with an almost frightening intensity. In Calcutta, he becomes the driving force of the civic administration that Chittaranjan Das once led. To the British, municipal politics are safely dull. To Bose, they are training. He studies budgets like battle plans. Streets and slums become his map. Every broken lamppost, every unswept lane is, to him, another reminder of what foreign rule actually looks like at ground level. Neglected, indifferent, rotting. He works until his fragile lungs protest. It doesn't matter. His body has already betrayed him once in Mandalay. He will not let it dictate terms again. The crowds notice. They see a leader who does not merely shout freedom from a stage and disappear, but one who wades into the filth of the city and tries to clean it. For the youth of Bengal, weary of petitions and polite resolutions, he begins to look like what they have been waiting for, a commander, not just a saint. The British notice too. Between 1927 and 1930, Bose is arrested over and over, sometimes formally, sometimes almost casually, as if the police are simply picking up a familiar package. Sedition, unlawful assembly, dangerous to public peace. The exact wording changes, the intention does not. By 1931, he has already spent years of his short life behind bars. Imagine the toll. Most men, after one or two brutal prison spells, learn to calculate risks differently. They temper their words, slow their steps, learn the art of surviving inside the system. Subhas goes the other way. Each arrest is like another degree of fever, pushing him closer to a kind of radical clarity. He begins to speak more openly of socialism, of planned industrial growth, of reshaping not just who rules India, but what India will be once it is free. He is no longer satisfied with the idea of merely transferring power from British hands to Indian hands like a ceremonial baton. He wants to melt the baton down and recast it. In 1930, even as he is in and out of prisons during the civil disobedience movement, the Calcutta Municipal Corporation elects him mayor, symbolically, almost defiantly. The British lock up the city's own chosen leader, but his name is announced from the dais anyway. A mayor in chains, power without freedom. That image sears itself into the public imagination. Yet even this rising star has limits. His health is collapsing. Tuberculosis stalks him. In 1933, after another imprisonment, the British do something unexpected. They let him leave India for medical treatment abroad. They think distance will dilute him. Instead, it sharpens him like a blade. In Europe, Bose becomes a wandering student of power. Picture him crossing cold, gray cities, Vienna, Berlin, Rome, Prague, wrapped in a heavy coat, a thin Indian face in a continent drifting toward catastrophe. He watches parades of goose-stepping soldiers, hears speeches that shake stadiums, reads newspapers filled with the words dictatorship and war. He does not fall in love with fascism. He is too sharp, too rooted in human suffering for that. The brutality of Nazism and Italian fascism repels him, but he is fascinated, electrified by one thing: speed. These regimes, however monstrous, move fast. They transform backward economies in a handful of years. They mobilize industry, unite masses, defy old empires. To a man who has watched India inch forward through decades of slow petitions and partial reforms, this is a dangerous temptation. He asks himself a question that will haunt the rest of his life. Can a poor, colonized nation afford the luxury of moving slowly? In London, he meets exiled Indian revolutionaries. In Central Europe, he writes a book, The Indian Struggle, laying out a plan that blends socialism, nationalism, and relentless pressure on the British. The book is banned in India before many people can even see it. The empire understands what is being cooked, even if most Indians do not. Meanwhile, something darker is gathering over Europe. In 1936, as Hitler reoccupies the Rhineland and war charts are quietly updated in foreign ministries, Subhas returns to India. He is not the same man who left. The Mandalay prisoner is now a strategist with a global view and a ticking clock in his head. He believes war is coming. When it comes, he is certain the British Empire will be stretched thin, vulnerable. That will be India's chance to strike, not with petitions, but with coordinated nationwide action, perhaps even with international help. The thought is terrifying. The thought is intoxicating. Back home, the Indian National Congress looks both familiar and strangely slow to him. Gandhi is still the moral sun around which the party orbits. Nehru is emerging as the intellectual star of the next generation. Patel, Rajendra Prasad, Rajagopalachari, each has carved out a sphere of influence. Where does Bose fit? He plunges in to find out. In 1937, under the Government of India Act, elections are held. Congress wins big in several provinces. For the first time, Indians taste a sliver of real administrative power through provincial ministries. Debate rages inside the party. Is this progress or a trap? Should they accept office under a constitution they had opposed? Gandhi leans toward cautious acceptance. Use the space, test the machinery, prepare the people. Bose worries. He fears that office will tame Congress, turn its leaders into careful managers instead of revolutionaries. Sitting in leather chairs, signing files, they may begin to think in terms of what is administratively possible instead of what is historically necessary. It is in the middle of this friction that the next twist explodes. In early 1938, at the Congress session in Haripura, the party needs a new president. Names are floated, alliances form in corridors, and suddenly a word begins to spread through the delegates. Bose, Bose, Bose. For many young workers and socialists, he is the obvious choice. He has suffered, organized, inspired. He speaks the language of sacrifice and steel. Gandhi, though hesitant about his radical methods, does not oppose him this time. The elders calculate that his popularity can be useful and that they can guide him. He is elected president of the Indian National Congress. Think about the scale of this leap. In less than 2 decades, he has gone from rusticated student to political prisoner rotting in Mandalay to the head of the largest anti-colonial organization in the world. Millions now look to him not just as a regional hero, but as one of the main architects of India's future. With the presidency comes a chance he has craved, real authority to shape strategy. He moves quickly. At Haripura, his presidential address is not a gentle homily, it is a manifesto. He calls for industrialization, national planning, a strong central state that can bulldoze poverty and backwardness. He speaks of socialism with the calm certainty of a man discussing tomorrow's sunrise. He also does something else. He begins to talk about war. Europe, he says, is heading toward a giant, violent collision. When that war breaks out, India must be ready, not to send its sons to die for the British, but to use the chaos to strike for freedom. He insists that Congress prepare a plan. If Britain is dragged into conflict and refuses to grant independence, India must launch a mass civil disobedience movement of unprecedented scale. He wants a deadline, an ultimatum, a ticking clock that the British cannot ignore. For Gandhi and many of the older leaders, this is a line they are unwilling to cross. Their instinct is to avoid entangling India's moral cause with the bloodbath of European politics. They fear that too much haste, too much aggression, will provoke brutal repression and perhaps fracture the fragile unity of the movement. On the surface, nothing breaks yet. The meetings are civil, smiles are exchanged, public statements are restrained. Underneath, the rivalry has sharpened into something close to open contest. The saint versus the soldier, the slow, patient chisel against the sudden, risky explosion. As 1938 bleeds into 1939, Germany invades Czechoslovakia. The world holds its breath. Inside Congress, tempers fray. Bose keeps pushing for preparedness, for a clear declaration that India will not be dragged into Britain's wars without its consent. Then comes another Congress session in Tripuri, March 1939. Once again, a president must be elected. This time, Gandhi makes his preference clear. Pattabhi Sitaramaya, a loyalist, a safe pair of hands. To Gandhi's followers, backing Sitaramaya is not just about one man, it is a test of faith in the Mahatma's judgment. Bose refuses to step aside. He stands again. The room divides. Imagine the tension. Delegates huddle in corners, voices drop to urgent whispers, notes are passed from hand to hand. This is no longer just about British rule. It is about who will direct the very heart of the freedom movement. The vote is taken. When the ballots are counted, the result sends a shock through the entire country. Bose wins. He defeats Gandhi's chosen candidate. In that instant, the myth of Gandhi's unchallengeable authority cracks. Newspapers speak of earthquake, of rebellion within Congress. For Bose's supporters, it is a moment of triumph. The radical, impatient, iron-willed line has won. But power in politics is often a mirage. The Working Committee, the real engine room of Congress, is stacked with Gandhi's loyalists. One by one, they resign, refusing to serve under Bose. Behind the scenes, pressure mounts. Conversations grow colder. Letters fly back and forth. Bose finds himself a president surrounded by a hostile cabinet. He has won the crown, but someone else controls the palace. The calendar, meanwhile, is not slowing down. In September 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Britain declares war on Germany. And with a single announcement in London, India is automatically dragged into the Second World War. No debate in Delhi, no consultation. With Indian leaders, nothing. Just like that, 200 million people are told they are at war. For Bose, this is the moment he has been predicting and dreading. The window has opened, but he is standing on the wrong side of the glass. He fights to push Congress toward an immediate confrontational response. Refuse cooperation, launch mass struggle, use the war to squeeze a promise of independence from a desperate Britain. Gandhi and the majority argue for a more cautious line, condemn fascism, negotiate, avoid actions that might aid Hitler. The split is now too deep to paper over. In April 1939, worn down by resistance from within his own party more than by fear of the British, Subhas resigns as Congress president. Publicly, he is graceful. Privately, he is furious. The man who defeated Gandhi's candidate in a democratic vote has been effectively removed without an election, but he does not walk away. Instead, he plays his next wild card. He forms the Forward Bloc within Congress, a faction meant to gather all the radicals, socialists, and impatient patriots under one banner. Its aim is simple and explosive: force the pace of the freedom struggle, with or without the blessing of the elders. The British watch this internal war with interest. A divided Congress is easier to handle. They decide to help the division along. In June 1940, after a series of fiery speeches in which Bose urges a nationwide anti-war campaign, the colonial government strikes. He is arrested under the Defense of India Act, this time not as a troublesome provincial leader, but as a clear and present danger in wartime. They lock him up in Presidency Jail, Calcutta. The world outside his cell is on fire. France falls to Germany. London burns under the Blitz. The Japanese eye Asia. The British Empire, for the first time in living memory, looks vulnerable, stretched, frightened. Inside, Subhas counts days. He can almost hear the gears of history grinding outside the prison walls, and he is trapped, powerless. Every month lost is another month in which Britain can consolidate defenses, cut deals, adjust strategies. He decides that if he cannot force his way out politically, he will force the government's hand another way. He stops eating. Hunger strike. The British are suddenly staring at a nightmare. If Subhas Chandra Bose dies in jail in the middle of a world war, he will not just become a martyr. He will become a legend, perhaps a spark for the very uprising they fear. Weeks pass. His body begins to fail. Doctors warn of permanent damage, even death. Public pressure grows. Bengal seethes. Eventually, the government blinks. They release him, not to freedom, to house arrest. Police cordon off his family home at Elgin Road in Calcutta. Intelligence officers move in opposite buildings. Informers watch every visitor. The idea is simple. He will be kept comfortable, monitored, slowly sidelined while the war plays out without him. For most political leaders, this would be the end of the road, a graceful slide into forced retirement, with occasional letters and carefully monitored interviews. For Bose, it is the start of the most audacious chapter of his life. He makes a decision so extreme it borders on insanity. If he cannot move India from within, he will leave India itself, slip through. the cracks of the empire, and return at the head of an army. The plan forms in whispers and scribbled notes, hidden in books and passed through trusted hands. Very few know the full design. British surveillance is thick. One careless word, one suspicious movement, and it all collapses. There is another cruel limit: time. By late 1940, the war is escalating fast. If he is to reach foreign powers, convince them to back an Indian Liberation Army, and organize a real force capable of challenging the British in Asia, he must move now. In a year or two, alliances will harden, borders will seal, and this narrow corridor of opportunity will disappear. And so, one cold January night in 1941, under a sky blank as a verdict, the countdown ends. Inside the house on Elgin Road, the prisoner is supposedly resting. Guards outside yawn, talk quietly. The city hums with its usual nighttime sounds. Upstairs, a man stands before a mirror. The round glasses are gone. The well-cut Bengali clothes are gone. In their place, a long brown coat, a cheap coarse shawl, heavy boots. His face is partly hidden by a beard. On his head, a fur cap. In the mirror, Subhas Chandra Bose disappears. A Pathan insurance agent named Ziauddin looks back. He steps out of his room, heart hammering, every sense screaming, down the stairs, through the courtyard, past the guards who have watched this house for months and think they know every inch of it. No one stops him. A car waits in the darkness. The door opens. He slips inside. The engine coughs to life. As the car rolls away from Elgin Road, from Calcutta, from the world that has tried to fix him in place, he does not look back. The journey ahead will take him across India under false names, through hostile borders, into Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, Germany, and eventually into an alliance with some of the most dangerous forces on Earth. It is a mad gamble. It is a race against empires and clocks and his own failing health. But for the man who walked away from the Indian civil service, defied Gandhi, defeated the Mahatma's candidate, and turned his prison cell into a war room, there is finally only one unbearable thought left: dying slowly in safety while history rages, waiting politely for freedom that might never come. So he chooses the other path, the one that disappears into the dark road ahead, toward the thunder of distant guns and the possibility, however faint, of breaking the British Empire not by pleading with it, but by surrounding it. The car slices through the sleeping city like a secret. No escort, no flags, no cheering crowds. Just a battered vehicle, its headlights swallowed by the January fog, carrying a man who has declared war on the largest empire on Earth, armed with nothing but a fake name and a ticking clock. Inside, the disguise scratches at his skin. The beard is itchy. The Pathan cap feels foreign. Every time the car passes a police post, his heart kicks once, hard in his chest. If they stop the car now, it's over. Not just for him, for the entire insane plan that only a handful of people on the planet even know exists. Because Subhas Chandra Bose is no longer playing the same game as his rivals in the Indian National Congress. While they debate resolutions under slow-turning fans, he is betting his life on a different answer to the same question: who will reach independence first? Them, with their negotiations and moral pressure? Or him, with speed, shock, and a war that is already devouring continents? Beyond the city, the roads get worse. Dust, potholes, occasional checkpoints. At each one, he stays slumped in the back, a Ziauddin too tired and unimportant to question. His guides do most of the talking. Days blur into nights. Calcutta melts into Bihar, then the northwest frontier. The language around him shifts. Faces change. The air grows colder, sharper as they climb toward Peshawar and the edge of British India. At every stage, betrayal is only one frightened villager or ambitious policeman away. Posters with his real face stare from many walls. Subversive. Dangerous. Wanted. Sometimes, as he warms his hands around a chipped cup of tea in some shabby roadside shelter, he wonders if one of the men sitting nearby will recognize those eyes from a faded newspaper photograph. But nobody does. The British Empire, for all its power, cannot imagine that this famous rebel is rattling past their own barracks in a second-hand car, cloaked not in magic but in their own arrogance. He slips over the border into Afghanistan like a ghost. Kabul is a half-friendly, half-hostile halfway house, a place where empires stare at each other warily over tea. For weeks he is Orlando Mazzotta, an Italian businessman limping across the map. Then, through a tangle of false papers and backdoor understandings, the path to Moscow opens. Winter wraps him as he heads north. Snow, endless freight yards, stations whose names he cannot pronounce. He travels as a guest, but also as a puzzle. Soviet officers eye him curiously. The USSR and Britain are not yet allies. The world's alliances are still half-formed, like storm clouds that haven't decided where to break. Finally, Berlin. He steps out into a city draped in swastikas. Marching boots echo off stone streets. Propaganda posters scream from walls. Loudspeakers spit speeches that turn crowds into roaring tides. The dictatorship he had studied from afar is now booming all around him. And here is the twist that would stun many of his admirers back in India. He has come to cut a deal with it. In his view, this is not romance. It is ruthless arithmetic. The British hold India in chains. The enemies of Britain, Germany, Italy, soon Japan, might be persuaded to hand him the tools he needs. Weapons, training, money, radio waves, a platform. But from the first, the collision is brutal. German officials listen, nod, serve him coffee, and then talk about race. About Aryan hierarchies, about how India is a problem of the East, not a priority. To them, he is interesting but peripheral. They dream of Moscow, London, not Delhi. Still, he squeezes whatever he can from this cold embrace. He sets up the Free India Center in Berlin, begins broadcasting in crackling radio waves to the subcontinent. This is Subhas Chandra Bose, speaking to you from the battlefield of Europe. His voice, carried on enemy transmitters, slips through British censorship, like a knife through gauze reaching Indian ears late at night. He visits camps full of Indian soldiers captured in North Africa, men who once wore British uniforms and now sit in limbo, forgotten, in barbed wire compounds under a foreign sky. He walks among them, talking not as a distant Neta, but as a comrade in arms. "Will you fight?" he asks, "for a flag that is your own?" From these prisoners he begins to raise a small force, the Indian Legion. New uniforms, new insignia, old hunger for dignity. They train, they drill, they dream of one day marching into India from the west, alongside Nazi divisions smashing through the British line, but that road never opens. In June 1941, Hitler turns on the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front detonates. German armies drive toward Moscow. Overnight, strategy shifts. Asia slips even lower on Berlin's priority list. The plan to send an Indian Legion across Iran evaporates. Bose watches his window of opportunity, already narrow, shrinking. Some nights, alone in his room, maps spread across a table. He traces routes with his fingers. West is closing, East is still on fire. Japanese troops are hammering at British positions in Asia. Singapore trembles. Burma is suddenly more important than Berlin. If he stays in Europe, he realizes, he will become a well-treated exile with a ceremonial army and no battlefield. That is not why he escaped Calcutta. So he makes another leap, one so insane that it reads like fiction. In 1943, he leaves Germany in a submarine. Think about that for a moment. An Indian nationalist hunted by the British slips into the steel belly of a German U-boat, U-180, and sinks beneath the Atlantic waves. No sunlight, cramped bunks, the constant metallic heartbeat of engines. Above them, Allied ships and planes scour the sea. For weeks, the submarine runs submerged, a white dot on no public map. Somewhere in the Indian Ocean, in a patch of sea so remote it might as well be another planet, U-180 surfaces to meet a Japanese submarine, I-29. In the rolling swell, two Axis navies perform a deadly ballet, trading supplies, and between them this one thin, bespectacled man, whose presence will soon electrify thousands in Asia. Subhas crosses from one steel coffin to another, mid-ocean. Water crashes against the hull. The wind howls. The horizon is empty and endless. If a single British plane had appeared at that moment, his story would have ended there, in fragments of steel and oil-slicked waves. But the sky stays blank. The ocean keeps its secret. When he finally emerges into the light again, it is in the Far East, Tokyo. He bows before the emperor as protocol demands, meets Japanese generals whose uniforms are stiff with medals, whose maps now stretch from Manchuria to the edge of India. They speak of Asia for Asians, of breaking Western empires, of shared struggle. He listens, but he does not forget. He has seen what great powers do to weaker nations. The Japanese rule in Korea and China is vicious, ruthless. He knows that even if they help him, they are not saviors, only temporary partners in a larger war. Still, the calculus is brutal and simple. The British must be driven out first. Everything else comes later. In Singapore, the real transformation begins. The city has just fallen in one of the most shocking defeats in British military history. Tens of thousands of Indian soldiers, former prisoners of the British, now stand behind Japanese fences. Many feel betrayed. They had fought and bled for the King Emperor only to be abandoned and captured in humiliation. Into this bitterness walks Subhas Chandra Bose, not as a fugitive now, but as a commander. The first time he appears before them, the atmosphere is electric. A roar goes up. Netaji, Netaji, leader. The title clings to him from that day on. He takes over the reformed Indian National Army, the INA, from the far-sighted but less charismatic Mohan Singh. Where others had seen only defeated soldiers, he sees the spine of a new liberation force. He moves like a man racing his own heartbeat. He reorganizes, recruits, drills. He throws out defeatism, replaces it with a brutal, almost fanatical confidence. "Give me blood," he tells them, "and I will give you freedom." The line is pure theater and deadly serious. Men in tattered uniforms straighten when they hear it. Some weep, others sign up on the spot. But he doesn't stop with men. In a world where most armies can barely imagine women beyond nursing roles, Bose creates the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, a full-fledged women's combat unit named after the Queen who fought the British in 1857. Young women from Malaya, Burma, India itself cut their hair, shoulder rifles, march in formation. Picture it. Barefoot girls from Tamil Nadu and Punjab, uniforms clinging to them in the Southeast Asian heat, shouting in unison, "Chalo Dilli!" On to Delhi. This too is part of his war with his rivals back home. While Gandhi speaks of nonviolence and Congress leaders sit at negotiation tables, Bose is building something tangible: soldiers, units, a government in exile. He wants the world, and perhaps even more Indians themselves, to see that the choice is no longer between slavery and prayer. There is a third option now. In October 1943 in Singapore, that option takes political form. He proclaims the provisional government of Azad Hind, Free India, not a club, not a committee, but a government. With him as head of state, prime minister, and supreme commander of the INA, Japan recognizes it. So do other Axis-aligned powers. It is, of course, a fragile recognition, dependent on Japanese goodwill. But symbolically, it explodes like a shell. For the first time since the East India Company seized Bengal in the 18th century, there is an Indian government openly dedicated to kicking the British out by force, commanding an actual army on real battlefields. He is given nominal control over the Andaman and Nicobar Islands after the Japanese occupy them. When the tricolor of Azad Hind rises there, 3 strips of color on a scrap of cloth above a lonely tropical outpost, it feels to many like a prophecy, a rehearsal for a much larger flag over a much larger land. Yet even in this moment of ascent crack show, the Japanese smile for photographs, salute his troops, print his slogans in friendly newspapers, but in the war councils they do not treat him as an equal. They see the INA as auxiliary, convenient, useful for propaganda. He pushes back again and again, demanding that his army be allowed to spearhead attacks into India, not just guard railways or sit in garrisons, and eventually, incredibly, he gets what he wanted. Ever since that submarine exchange in the Indian Ocean, the Indian National Army marches toward India. By early 1944, alongside Japanese divisions, INA units are fighting through the dense jungles of Burma, mud to the knees, leeches, malaria, air thick like soup, artillery blasts that shake the very trees, Imphal, Kohima. These are not parades, they are meat grinders. On one side of the front, Indian soldiers in British uniform fire rifles supplied by London. On the other, Indian soldiers in INA uniform charge under a tricolor not recognized by any Allied capital. Cousins, former comrades, childhood friends, now staring at each other through gun sights, each convinced that the other has chosen the wrong road to the same destination. In Delhi, Congress leaders watch the advance with a mix of alarm, admiration, and complicated fury. Here is Subhas, the man they had sidelined, now heading an army on India's doorstep. If he reaches the plains, if the cities erupt in parallel revolt, history might judge them, not him, as the ones who hesitated while freedom was within reach. But the clock, which had always been his ally, begins to turn on him. While the INA claws its way toward eastern India, the great tide of the Second World War is already shifting. The Japanese Navy has been smashed in the Pacific. American factories are outproducing everyone. The Soviet Red Army is pulverizing the Wehrmacht in Europe. The Axis, which had once seemed unstoppable, is now slowly but unmistakably losing. On the hills around Imphal and Kohima, this global reversal concentrates into something painfully simple: no supplies. Japanese logistics collapse. Food runs out, ammunition dwindles. Men fight on half rations, then quarter rations. Some eat grass, some eat the leather of their own boots. The monsoon turns trenches into flooded graves. Bose himself is not at the front line, gun in hand, but he is never far from it. He visits units wading through mud, boots soaked, uniforms stained with sweat and rain. Soldiers who have not seen their families in years press forward just to touch his hand. "Netaji," they ask in low, urgent voices, "will we see home again?" He answers with steel he sometimes does not feel, "Yes, in freedom." He cannot allow them to see his doubt, because the rivalry now is no longer just with the British, nor even with Congress. It is with time itself. He knows that if the INA is beaten back, if the Japanese retreat, the military phase of his struggle will crumble. The British will seize the narrative. Bose, the German-Japanese stooge, defeated. Armed struggle discredited. Nonviolence vindicated. Everything he has risked, from Mandalay to Berlin to that shuddering mid-ocean submarine transfer, rides on battles being fought by exhausted, hungry men in jungles most Indians will never see. And the culmination is harsh. By mid-1944, the Imphal offensive fails. The Japanese pull back. The INA, tied to their fortunes, stumbles with them, bleeding men and morale. Some units disintegrate. Others keep marching, skeletal but disciplined, deeper into Burma, away from the Indian border that had once seemed so close. Rain falls, graves fill. Maps are redrawn in offices thousands of kilometers away. The British begin to roll forward again. From the outside, it looks like the end of a failed gamble. Subhas Chandra Bose, the rebel who tried to outrun cautious politics by hitching his cause to the most violent powers of his age, appears to have lost. His rival strategy, freedom by force in a narrow wartime window, seems to be closing with him still on the wrong side of the glass. But inside the defeated columns in prisoner-of-war cages filling up with captured INA men, something else is happening. Something less visible, more dangerous to the Empire's future than any one battle. They have crossed a line in their own minds. They have pointed guns at the Union Jack. They have sworn oaths to a different flag. They have accepted the possibility of dying not as nameless sepoys in somebody else's war, but as soldiers of a yet unborn nation. That idea will not go back into the bottle easily. As 1945 approaches, Allied bombers darken the skies over Rangoon and Tokyo. Azad Hind offices pack in frantic haste. Files are burned, radios are dismantled. The provisional government, once so confident, becomes a caravan on the run, shifting from city to city as the Japanese perimeter shrinks. Netaji, who once rode through cheering crowds in Singapore and reviewed troops on proud parades, now travels in battered cars and military transports across collapsing front lines. And yet, even as the walls close in, he is still drawing lines on maps, still talking of regrouping in Manchuria, of seeking help from the Soviet Union, of launching yet another twist in a life already made of them. There is clearly almost no time left. The Axis is cracking, cities are burning on 3 continents. The war that he believed would be India's great opportunity is ending, just not the way he had hoped. Somewhere between the fading roar of Japanese engines and the distant chime of Allied victory bells, Subhas Chandra Bose realizes that his race against empire has entered its final, most desperate lap. He will need one more time to vanish into the sky and reappear in another theater of power, to bargain with another giant, to try to turn defeat into a different kind of opening. The man who slipped out of Elgin Road under a false name is about to attempt one last escape. Not from a prison this time, or even from British territory, but from the wreckage of the very alliance he chose in order to break his oldest rival. And as he boards his next fateful flight, carrying with him the ashes of a government in exile and the hopes of thousands of soldiers, now sitting in Allied cages, one question hangs over him, heavy as the monsoon clouds over Rangoon. In the final accounting, will history remember him as the man who lost India's war, or the one who lit the fuse that finally made the empire tremble. The room is too small to hold the size of the decision he is about to make. Maps curl on the walls. A fan stirs heavy Rangoon air that smells of smoke and defeat. Outside, the once proud offices of Azad Hind are half-packed, half-abandoned. Radios have fallen silent. Japanese officers speak in quick, nervous bursts. And in the middle of this collapsing world, Subhas Chandra Bose is staring at a flight plan that looks less like travel and more like a tightrope over a volcano. Manila is gone. Tokyo is burning. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are words not yet fully understood, but felt in the way even hardened soldiers go quiet when they hear them. The Japanese Empire, the pillar he leaned on to strike at the British, is cracking fast. If he stays, he will be swallowed by the debris. If he surrenders, the British will parade him in chains and stamp traitor across everything he has ever stood for. So he chooses a third, almost impossible route, slip through the ruins of one dying empire to knock on the door of another, the Soviet Union. It is August 1945. The Red Army is tearing through Japanese lines in Manchuria. Moscow will soon be one of the three arbiters of the post-war world. If he can reach them, if he can say face-to-face, "Use me, use India in your bargaining with Britain," then perhaps the game is not over, but the window is days wide. Maybe hours. Soviet armies are advancing. Japanese authority is disintegrating. Allied intelligence is everywhere. Each day he waits, another door slams shut. So, once again, he does what has defined his entire adult life. He runs toward the narrowest crack in the wall while everyone else stands still. On 17th of August in Saigon, he strips his world down to a suitcase, a set of uniforms, some papers, and a small circle of loyal aides. The provisional government of Azad Hind is already more symbol than structure. He carries its documents as if they were still a sword. The next morning, as the sun claws its way into the sky, he boards a Japanese military aircraft. It is not an impressive machine. A Mitsubishi Ki-21 bomber, repurposed for transport. No comfortable seats, no safety guarantees. Just metal, oil, and a prayer that the pilots are still sharper than the chaos consuming their command. He climbs aboard in full uniform. Peaked cap, boots polished, decorations pinned. Even now, fleeing one collapsing front to seek another risky patron, he insists on looking like what he has created, the Supreme Commander of the Indian National Army, the head of state of an unrecognized but unbroken dream. The engines cough to life. Rangoon falls away under the wings. Streets he had moved through as a would-be liberator shrinking into anonymous lines as the plane climbs into a sky that is suddenly very, very empty. His next stops are sketched. Taipei, Dairen, then perhaps Khabarovsk, then Moscow. Each arrow on the map is a bet that the world will wait for him just a little longer. Inside the cabin, the heat is brutal, the noise constant. Sweat crawls under his collar. An officer shouts to be heard over the roar. The words are torn to pieces by the engines. They fly north and east, over islands and seas. He barely has time to register. He must be thinking, not for the first time, about the race he has been running for years. On one track, Nehru, Patel, Gandhi, the Congress leadership. Negotiations, resolutions, jails, spinning wheels, hunger strikes. The slow squeeze of moral pressure. On the other, himself, Netaji, who gambled on guns and alliances with monsters, who believed that history's door opens not with gentle persuasion but with explosives and surprise. He had wanted to arrive at the finish line first, a free India, born in the shockwave of global war, owing its liberation not to British generosity but to its own armed will. Now strapped into a rattling Japanese plane, he can almost feel the other runners gaining on him. The British are already talking of post-war reforms. The Congress leaders, still in prison but morally glowing in much of the world, are waiting to step back into the light. The clock that had been his accomplice is ticking in someone else's favor. If Moscow says no, if this flight fails, then the story of India's freedom will be written in their handwriting, not his. The first leg ends at Taihoku, today's Taipei. They land roughly on a hot, shimmering airfield. Dazed passengers step out, blink in the light. The war is etched in everything. Bomb craters at the edges of the runway, nervous mechanics, a tension you can almost breathe, a refueling stop, a brief wait, a second takeoff. He gets back in. The engines roar again. The bomber strains forward, dragging itself along the runway, faster, faster, the air trembling around it. And then, a sound like the sky itself tearing. One engine lurches, screams, bursts into flame. The wing blossoms into an orange-white flower of burning fuel. The aircraft veers, skids, slams back onto the ground with a violence that snaps bones and metal alike. Inside, men are thrown like dolls. Heat punches through the fuselage. For a second that stretches into something like eternity, Subhas Chandra Bose is still alive inside this furnace, trapped, tangled in wreckage, fire licking closer, hungry. Witnesses say he tries to move. They say he pulls himself free, or half free, that he is dragged out by others, uniform burning, skin already a horror that polite reports will later call severely injured. The smell of burning fuel mixes with burning flesh. On the runway at Taihoku, the man who slipped out of Elgin Road under a false name, who crossed continents by car, train, submarine, and bomber who outwitted British spies and charmed Axis generals, is now lying in a pool of pain so intense that even he who has lived with discipline as a second skin can no longer speak in more than fragments. He is rushed to a Japanese military hospital. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, some still in shock from the suddenness of it all, fight a war inside one room while the global war outside grinds toward its own bloody ceasefire. They cut away charred cloth. They clean burned flesh with hands that know from grim experience how little can be done for injuries like these. He drifts in and out of consciousness. An interpreter leans close. Does he say anything? Later testimonies will claim he speaks of India, of freedom, of a coming victory that he himself will not see. By nightfall, 18th August 1945, Subhas Chandra Bose is dead. Officially, cremation. A small, hot, hurried ceremony. Ashes placed in an urn. The urn handed over to a Japanese officer, then carried through a shattered empire to Tokyo's Renkoji Temple, where it will rest. In a quiet alcove watched over by a gentle Buddha, no body is ever returned to India. No grave. No coffin draped in the tricolor he had raised on distant islands. Just photographs of a wrecked plane, a bleeding man on a stretcher, and the testimonies of Japanese doctors and officials recorded in careful script. The British hear the news and at first almost refuse to believe it. Death would be a mercy. Far better for them to capture him, to put him in the dock alongside Nazi war criminals, to show the world that this man who once shook hands with Hitler and Tojo is just another villain of the Axis. But he has slipped through their fingers once more. Not into Moscow this time, but into myth. In Calcutta, the rumor runs ahead of the facts. Some say he is alive, hiding in Russia. Others whisper of secret Himalayan ashrams, of a bearded holy man who looks too much like Netaji to be coincidence. Stories bloom like fungus in damp air. They will not stop for decades. The truth, charred, prosaic, locked in wartime records, simply cannot compete with a life that has always behaved more like a legend than a biography. While people argue over whether he is dead, the ghost of Subhas Chandra Bose begins the most powerful campaign of his life. In Delhi, the Red Fort, once the seat of Mughal emperors, is chosen as the stage for a different kind of imperial drama. The INA, shattered on the battlefields of Burma, has left thousands of prisoners in Allied hands. The British decide to make an example of the officers, to charge them with treason, murder, abetment, crimes that will show every Indian soldier what awaits those who swap the King Emperor's colors for the tricolor of Azad Hind. They picked 3 names for the first big trial in late 1945. Prem Kumar Sahgal, Gurbaksh Singh Dillon, Shahnawaz Khan. 3 religions, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim. It is almost too neat, too carefully composed, as if the empire wants to remind India how easily it can slice her apart again if she forgets who holds the knife. The prosecution expects an orderly spectacle. What they get is something closer to controlled detonation. The Congress, sniffing the shift in public mood, makes a startling move. Jawaharlal Nehru himself, the man who once clashed bitterly with Bose over methods and ideology, puts on his lawyer's gown and joins the defense team. On paper, this is just a legal strategy. In reality, it is a recognition of a new battlefield. Bose, the rival they once sidelined, is now too big to ignore. His soldiers, his slogans, his daring have sunk too deep into the Indian mind. If the Congress wants to lead the future, it cannot allow the past few years to be painted solely in Axis colors. Crowds surge outside the Red Fort day after day. Posters of Netaji appear alongside Congress flags. Slogans once whispered now roar in full throat. Lal Quila Todd Do, break the Red Fort. Street vendors sell portraits of INA officers in makeshift frames. Women who never held a gun break into heated arguments about wartime alliances and sacrifice. Inside the courtroom, the empire is on trial as much as the accused. The INA officers do not plead for mercy. They speak of why they left the British Army, why they swore new oaths, why they believed that aligning with Japan, flawed, brutal, Japan was still better than dying namelessly for a foreign crown. Newspapers across India carry every word. For millions who never heard Bose's Berlin broadcasts or saw an INA drill parade in Burma, this is their first real glimpse into his alternate road to freedom, and something dangerous happens. Sympathy for the defendants crosses political lines. Conservative businessmen, radical students, village elders, urban workers, people who do not agree on much else, find themselves united. In one simple, explosive feeling, these men are ours. The British, facing strikes, protests, donation drives for the INA Defense Fund, begin to feel something they have not felt on this scale before. The loyalty of the Indian soldier is slipping. The mutiny comes like a lightning bolt from an unexpected sky. February 1946, the Royal Indian Navy. Hundreds, then thousands of Indian ratings. Sailors who wear His Majesty's uniform, who man British ships, who are expected to be more disciplined than any street crowd, suddenly refuse to obey. In Bombay, Karachi, Calcutta, and other ports, they pull down the Union Jack and hoist the tricolor and the Muslim League's green crescent side by side. Hindu, Muslim, Sikh ratings shout the same slogan, Jai Hind, the war cry Bose had popularized. They paint Netaji on ship hulls. They blast INA songs on ship radios. Their demands are confused, overlapping, better food, equal treatment, political freedom, but the emotional core is unmistakable. They have been watching. They watched the INA trials. They heard about Subhas's march through Burma, about his army of volunteers, about his refusal to accept British rule as anything but a target. And now, in the very heart of Britain's military machine in India, they are echoing his defiance. For a few days, British authority in the harbors of empire hangs by a thread. Armed conflict looms. British warships train their guns on ships filled with Indian sailors. Indian troops are ordered to fire if necessary. The Congress leadership, fearing chaos that might derail a political settlement, and deeply wary of a mass-armed revolt they cannot fully control, urges restraint, calls for calm. The mutiny is eventually tamed, but the damage is done. In London, Prime Minister Clement Attlee and his advisors look at the reports from India and see what they have dreaded since 1857, an army whose obedience can no longer be taken for granted. Attlee later, in private conversation, will coolly list the reasons Britain left India so quickly after the war. Gandhi's role, he says, was minimal. The INA and the threat it revealed, that the Indian armed forces might not stand by if rebellion explodes again, that, he implies, was decisive. Subhas Chandra Bose, dead or missing, photographed in cracked frames on the walls of chawls and mansions alike, has reached across the grave to twist the arm of an empire. The race he started is being finished by men who once rejected his route. August 1947. At the stroke of midnight, Jawaharlal Nehru stands in the Constituent Assembly and speaks of India's tryst with destiny. The microphone hums. The world listens. Outside, crowds dance. Crackers explode. The tricolor climbs flagpoles in Delhi, Calcutta, Madras, Bombay. In Port Blair, in the Andaman Islands, where Bose once hoisted his own flag under Japanese patronage, fireworks crackle over the dark sea. Some older residents remember his visit, his speech, his promise that this was just the beginning. But he is not here. There is no place reserved for him on the podium. His provisional government of Azad Hind is not officially recognized as a predecessor to the Republic. His soldiers, struggling to find jobs, pensions, a place in the new order, discover that history, written by the victors, is generous, with adjectives, brave, patriotic, and stingy with concrete rewards. Nehru and his colleagues, now at the wheel of a newborn state, shape a story for the textbooks. Gandhi, the saint of nonviolence. Nehru, the architect of modern India. Patel, the iron integrator. And Bose? He is there, but sideways. Acknowledged as a fiery nationalist. Praised for his courage, his organizational genius. Quietly criticized, in half sentences and cautious footnotes, for his unfortunate alliances, his controversial strategy. The rivalry that marked his living years now continues between memories. One path, the Congress path, has delivered a real functioning country. The other, the Bose path, delivered a moral shock that helped break the British grip, but came entangled with the darkness of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. For many, the judgment is simple. He chose the wrong friends, and history must keep a safe distance. But India is too big, too divided, too emotionally complex for a single verdict. In Bengal, particularly, Netaji refuses to stay inside the neat, cautious frame. Kolkata's tramcars rattle past Netaji Subhas Road. Children go to schools named after him. Old freedom fighters gather on anniversaries of his birth and death and speak, eyes shining, of the day he slipped past the British. Eye of INA parades in Singapore, of daring plans and doomed offensives. In 1956, the Indian government, pushed by public demand, sets up the Shah Nawaz Committee to investigate his death. They travel to Japan. They inspect the Renkoji Temple. They interview surviving doctors and witnesses from Taihoku. Their conclusion: Bose died in that crash on 18th of August 1945. The files are stamped. The report is tabled. But on the streets, in tea shops, in railway compartments where second-class passengers argue more intensely than most parliaments, the verdict does not stick. How can a man like that die in a simple accident? Someone demands. Impossible. Another shrugs, lowers his voice, leans in with the irresistible pleasure of conspiracy. My cousin in Uttar Pradesh swears he saw him. Sannyasi, quiet, but the eyes the same. The ghost story mutates. In the 1960s and 70s, another commission, another inquiry, the Khosla Commission, again upholds the crash and ashes narrative. And yet in Faizabad, in a modest house cluttered with newspapers and secrecy, a mysterious ascetic known as Gumnami Baba lives, out his days, receiving select visitors, burning his correspondence, watching the news with a sharp, hungry interest. After his death in the 1980s, rumors explode. Some who claim they knew him whisper, "That was Netaji." Court cases follow. A third investigation, the Mukherjee Commission, in the early 2000s digs into the ashes, the testimonies, the possibility of Soviet involvement. It questions the Japanese records, suggests that the Renkoji ashes may not be Bose's. The government, by now led by very different men in very different times, rejects this finding. And so the image remains suspended between fire and fog. Official India, in ceremonies and on coins and stamps, increasingly embraces him as a national icon, a sanitized patriot whose portrait can hang comfortably on walls without raising awkward questions about alliance and ideology. Politicians across the spectrum compete for his shadow. One party promises to declassify all the files about him, to restore the honor of the INA, to rename islands and roads. The Andaman and Nicobar archipelago gains new labels: Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose Dweep, Shahid Dweep, Swaraj Dweep. Another party invokes his secularism, his socialism, his distrust of religious politics. As a counterweight to those who would claim him as their own, statues go up. In Delhi, near India Gate, a massive figure of him in forward stride replaces an empty canopy once occupied by a British king. On Republic Day, troops march past it to the cry of Jai Hind. The irony that this very cry was once banned, that the man who made it famous once flew in enemy planes against Allied positions, is acknowledged in speeches but filed away in practice. Schoolchildren memorize 3 or 4 key lines. He was brave. He was Netaji. He said, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom." Very few are asked to sit with the harder parts, that he risked India's moral capital by sitting across from Hitler in Berlin, by accepting Japanese backing while Japanese armies were brutalizing Asia, that he believed democracy should wait until after independence, that he admired aspects of authoritarian leadership, that he spoke warmly of planning and discipline in terms that sometimes sounded uncomfortably close to the regimes he courted, that his path, had it succeeded fully, might have given India not Nehruvian parliamentarianism but something far more centralized and martial. He becomes in public memory what complex figures often become, a Rorschach test. To some, he is the purest patriot, the man who dared to do whatever it took, while others talked. To others, he is a brilliant but flawed comet, burning too close to dark suns. Some nights, in certain crowds, his name still draws cheers louder than any living politician's. On the border with Myanmar, where old INA trails vanish into jungle, local guides still point to ridges and say, Netaji's men fought here. For them, the line between myth and map is thin. They walk through villages where grandchildren of INA soldiers grow up under tin roofs, their inheritance more pride than pension. In the Indian Armed Forces, where loyalty to the Constitution and the elected government is now absolute doctrine, his memory lives in a subtler way, in the idea that the Indian soldier is not just a colonial sepoy but a citizen in uniform. In unofficial stories passed from senior officers to cadets about how the British looked at the INA and the naval mutiny and realized the game was up. In the whispered understanding that one man with a radio and a handful of battalions on the other side of the world managed to shake the Empire's supreme confidence in its own army. And always at the edges of this legacy stands the unclosed circle of his rivalry with those who did live to rule. In speeches, leaders praise the contributions of all streams of the freedom struggle, nonviolent and militant, constitutional and revolutionary. The sentence seems designed to paper over differences that, in their own time, were anything but polite. Imagine for a moment if his plane had landed safely, if he had reached Moscow, argued his case, stood in the late 1940s in the same Delhi where Nehru read out the Midnight Pledge. Would India, independent but divided, have found room for two titans, one draped in a khadi shawl, the other in a military greatcoat, in the same cabinet? Or would the rivalry that once split Congress have cracked the new nation too? History spares us the answer. Instead, it leaves us with this: a man who vanished in fire at 38, yet still refuses, 80 years later, to leave the stage. A strategy that lost its war on the battlefield but perhaps helped win the larger war in the minds of men who carried rifles for a foreign crown. A legacy fought over in Parliament, at street corner bookstalls, on late-night television debates, in WhatsApp forwards loaded with half-truths and hero worship. In the end, Subhas Chandra Bose's life does not offer a comfortable story. It offers something harder, sharper, like a fragment of shrapnel you keep turning in your hand, afraid to let go. How far can you go, it asks, for freedom, before you become tangled in the very evil you oppose? Can a defeated army still be victorious if it makes an empire doubt its own invincibility? Whose path saved India? The one that refused all violence, or the one that embraced it so completely that it disappeared into the flames of another war? There are many answers, but in every one of them, somewhere, in a car slipping through a foggy Calcutta night, in a submarine rising to meet another in the middle of a silent ocean, in a burning plane on a sun-blasted runway, you can see the same figure, lean, intense, restless, always running against a clock only he can hear, always racing not just the British, not just his rivals, but time itself, and leaving behind in the space where he falls a question that a free India is still trying to answer.